Ethan Vale was never built for the world he was born into. At least, that was what people always told him. He grew up the boy who ran last in school races, the one who wheezed after climbing 2 flights of stairs, the one who coughed his way through gym class until the teacher waved him off to sit on the sidelines. His asthma kept him weak, his thin frame made him easy to overlook, and his quiet voice invited ridicule more than it commanded attention. On Earth, strength was measured by competition, by bravado, by who could take up the most space in a room. Ethan took up almost none. He found refuge in the world of life under microscopes, in the delicate balance of ecosystems, where even the smallest insect played a role larger than its size suggested. Biology became his escape, then his obsession, and finally his career. He spoke with awe about patience and adaptation, about the way fragile organisms thrived in impossible conditions. Yet, whenever he tried to share that wonder, people dismissed him as naive. Compassion doesn't feed you, one colleague sneered. Observation doesn't win wars. Ethan learned to lower his eyes, to accept their laughter, to carry his notebook instead of a sword, so when the opportunity came to join a scientific expedition through a newly discovered wormhole, he seized it, not out of bravado, but out of quiet desperation. He wanted to prove to himself, perhaps, to the universe, that his way of seeing the world mattered. He didn't pretend he would be the strongest explorer. He told himself he would at least be the most careful. The ship was sleek, humming with energy as it pierced the threshold of the wormhole. Ethan pressed his face to the viewport, eyes wide with the hunger of a man who had never been invited to adventure, but had found himself on its doorstep. For a moment, the void bent into beauty. Colors swirled like liquid fire, streams of energy, arcing across the hull. Ethan scribbled frantic notes about wavelengths and shifting spectra, already dreaming of lectures he could give. Then the storm hit. Gravity convulsed around them, dragging the ship in directions no compass could name. Sirens screamed. Panels burst. The crew shouted commands, their voices drowned by the roar of reality, tearing itself apart. Ethan clutched the straps of his seat, chest tight, lungs refusing to draw enough air. He tried to steady himself, tried to observe, but the storm didn't want patience. It wanted to consume. A fracture split the hull. The air whipped from his lungs as the cabin shattered into chaos. The wormhole spat its prey out like broken fragments, hurling Ethan into blackness. When he awoke, silence was the first thing he noticed. Not the silence of peace, but the heavy, coiled silence of a predator's den. He lay sprawled on rough ground, dust clinging to his skin, ribs aching with every shallow breath. His vision blurred, then sharpened, revealing a sky he had never seen before, bruised violet with streaks of green lightning crawling across the horizon. The air was heavy, sharp with minerals that stung his throat. He tried to sit up, but his chest flared in pain. Blood stained his sleeve where metal had cut him. His breaths rasped, shallow and desperate. He knew this wasn't Earth. Every instinct told him this place did not welcome the unprepared. A sound cut through the air, a low, guttural rumble. Ethan froze, head turning toward jagged ridges that loomed nearby. Something moved between them, huge and deliberate. He forced himself to crawl backward, every stone cutting into his palms, but the movement only made his lungs burn harder. He pressed against the base of a twisted tree, trembling, knowing full well that if whatever stalked him decided to attack, he had no chance. He tried to think like a biologist, to analyze instead of panic. The soil was acidic, the vegetation sparse and barbed. Survival here must be a contest of brutality. His fragile frame was not made for this crucible. He could feel it already, the weight of a planet designed to strip away weakness, to demand strength he did not possess. The sky roared with thunder again, and rain began to fall, hissing as it struck the earth. Drops burned faintly against his skin, acidic enough to sting. Ethan scrambled for shelter, dragging himself beneath an overhang of stone. heart pounding, alone, injured, gasping for breath. His notebook was gone, lost in the storm. His tools were shattered. All that remained was his mind, his stubborn will to keep observing, to keep trying even when no one believed in him. But here, in this place, what good was patience? What good was compassion when the very rain wanted him dead? The truth settled over him. Like the storm clouds above, he was weaker here than anywhere he had ever been. His voice cracked as he whispered into the storm, a confession to the alien world that surrounded him. I was the weakest on Earth. Now I'm not even sure I'll live one more day. The first night on Thyros felt endless. Ethan crouched in the shallow cave, the acidic rain sizzling against the stone outside, each drop echoing like a clock ticking down to his death. His lungs rattled as he struggled to breathe, the thin air scraping against his chest like sandpaper. He pressed his back to the wall, forcing himself to remain still. He had survived a storm. That was something. But he knew this world had more trials waiting. His body, weak even on Earth, trembled under the weight of alien gravity. Yet his mind, his one weapon, kept whispering, observe, adapt, survive. The next morning came without warning. The storm clouds pulled back to reveal a sky washed in strange light, violet and bronze, blending together. Ethan crawled to the cave entrance, his body aching, and looked out at a land that was as beautiful as it was hostile. Towering trees with thorned branches twisted upward, their leaves metallic and glistening. Herds of reptilian creatures stalked the horizon, moving with a fluid grace that made them both majestic and terrifying. His stomach churned with hunger. He spotted fruits hanging from a low tree, glowing faintly blue, but the moment he reached for one, the skin blistered at his touch. Poison, he recoiled, sucking on his burned fingers, realizing this planet had evolved every weapon to punish the reckless. I can't act like a warrior, he thought. I have to think like a biologist. He began testing carefully. He broke leaves, smelled their oils, smeared juices on stones before touching them. Slowly, painfully, he learned what wouldn't kill him. A moss with a bitter smell eased his hunger when boiled in rainwater, neutralizing its acidity. Bark from a crimson tree wrapped his wounds and slowed the bleeding. Each discovery was a victory whispered to the emptiness, but he wasn't alone. That night, as he rested, he heard the low growl again. The sound slid over the rocks like liquid threat. His heart hammered. He clutched a stone, though he knew it would be useless against what stalked him. From the shadows emerged a pack of predators, reptilian beasts with glowing eyes and teeth like shards of obsidian. They moved as one, circling, jaws clicking. Ethan's mind raced. He backed deeper into the cave, but it was shallow. There was nowhere to run. His lungs burned as fear constricted his chest. He thought of Earth, of being mocked, of always being the one protected, never the protector. Now, there was no one left to save him. He braced for the end. Then, the ground shook. A roar split the air louder, deeper, filled with authority. The pack froze. From the ridge above, a figure leapt down, massive and commanding. She landed between Ethan and the beasts, her silhouette framed by the moonlight of two suns rising. A towering alien woman, her skin shimmering like bronze, her muscles coiled with practiced power. She wielded a blade longer than Ethan's body, carved from bone and fire-hardened. She charged with fearless precision, striking down one predator in a single blow. Another lunged at her side, but she twisted, crushing its skull beneath her knee. The rest fled, their pack broken. Silence fell again, save for Ethan's ragged breathing. She turned toward him, her eyes, golden and sharp, narrowed. She studied him as one might study a peculiar insect, fragile, yet oddly fascinating. With a voice like thunder softened by curiosity, she spoke words he didn't understand. Then, in halting translation from a device strapped to her chest, the words reached him. You are not dead. Strange. Ethan swallowed hard, unsure whether to thank her or beg her to leave. But she stepped closer, towering above him, her gaze amused. She reached down, grabbing him by the arm as though he weighed nothing, and pulled him to his feet. He winced at her strength, coughing. "You are weak," the translator said flatly. She tilted her head, almost smiling. "Hollow bone. Yet you lived this long." Curious. Ethan wanted to argue, to tell her that weakness was not what defined him, but no words came. His throat was dry, his lungs aflame. She didn't wait for an answer. With effortless motion, she slung him over her shoulder like a trophy. The world blurred as she carried him through the harsh terrain. Ethan struggled, but her grip was iron. He caught glimpses of her people, colossal figures in armor, warriors training with spears, children climbing stone walls with ease. As she entered the village, laughter erupted. Dozens of eyes fell on him, small, trembling, clumsy, dragged in like prey. The towering woman dropped him in the center. The crowd jeered, pointing, mocking in a language he barely understood. The translation device on her chest spoke again. "This is what the storm left me," she said to them, her tone sharp with amusement. "The soft one, who lives where he should die." The laughter echoed through the village, rolling like thunder. Ethan stood, trembling, humiliated, every memory of Earth's ridicule amplified 100 times here. He lowered his eyes, his body weak, his lungs aching. But even as the warriors mocked, Ethan's gaze flicked from their weapons to their wounds, from their food to their water. He began to see things they didn't notice: mold on their grain, infections spreading from unclean cuts, flaws in the way their tools were shaped. He realized something then. They were strong, stronger than any humans he had ever seen, but they were blind to the details that could undo them, blind to the quiet truths he had built his life around. As the laughter swelled, Ethan whispered to himself, steadying his trembling hands, "If I am to live here, it won't be with their strength, it will be with mine." The laughter of the tribe still rang in Ethan's ears long after the warriors dispersed, leaving him kneeling in the dirt at the center of their village. His ribs ached where they had struck him playfully, though, for these giants, even playful blows carried bruises, deep enough to make him wince. The towering woman who had dragged him there, Kaelira, leaned on her bone-forged blade and watched him with narrowed eyes, as though trying to decide if he was a curiosity worth keeping or a mistake worth discarding. The tribe's dwellings rose, around him towering stone structures, reinforced with massive tusks from beasts that must have been hunted in battles Ethan could hardly imagine. Smoke curled from fires that burned with a strange, greenish flame, fueled by resin harvested from trees that looked like jagged claws reaching into the sky. The air carried the scent of charred meat and iron. Children of the tribe, already nearly as large as Earth's grown men, tossed spears longer than Ethan's height back and forth with casual precision. He was surrounded by strength on every side, and yet, as he watched them, he began to notice cracks. Their food was stored in open pits, swarming with insects that spread rot. Warriors returned from hunts with deep cuts, barely bound, the flesh raw and inflamed. A young boy coughed violently near the fires, his skin streaked with lesions. Scientist's mind stirred, even as fear clutched his chest. Strength, he realized, had blinded them to fragility. Their muscles carried them through battle, but ignorance would be their undoing. Kaelira barked something in her language, and a warrior dragged forward, a young man, his face pale, his arms swollen and discolored from a beast's venom. The crowd murmured, but no one moved to help. The warrior lifted his shoulders in resignation, as though saying, "He was strong, now he is nothing." Ethan's eyes widened. He recognized the pattern of swelling, the discoloration of veins. On Earth, he had studied toxins, venoms, and natural antidotes. He had seen something similar when experimenting with compounds in jungles where snake bites were common. His body trembled with hesitation. Should he step forward? What if they killed him for interfering? But then the boy groaned in pain, and Ethan felt something burn inside him, something that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with compassion. He pushed himself to his feet, legs unsteady, and staggered toward the boy. The tribe laughed again, voices booming like thunder. A few shoved him aside, their hands heavy as stone, but Ethan persisted, crawling if he had to. He reached the boy and knelt beside him, Kaelira's golden eyes fixed on him, a mixture of amusement and warning. Ethan scanned the nearby environment. His eyes caught a growth of moss clinging to a stone wall near the fire pit. He had tested that moss before. When boiled, its properties had neutralized acidic compounds. He scrambled toward it, tore it free, and mashed it into a paste with trembling fingers. He pressed it against the swollen flesh. The boy screamed at first, the pain sharp, but then his breathing slowed. The angry black streaks on his arm began to recede, the venom weakening. The crowd's laughter faltered into silence. Eyes narrowed, whispers spread. Ethan held his breath, terrified, waiting for the boy to worsen, but instead, his color slowly returned. The young man sat up, dazed but alive. The tribe stared. For the first time, their gaze on Ethan was not filled with mockery, but with something else, in certain respect, or perhaps suspicion. Kaelira approached, looming over him. She crouched so close that her shadow swallowed him whole. Her voice, carried through the translator, was softer this time, though still edged with sharpness. "You did this?" she asked. Ethan nodded. He would have died. The moss. He stopped himself, realizing they wouldn't care for the science. Only the result? "Yes, I did." Kaelira studied him for a long moment. The corners of her lips tugged into something not quite a smile. Strange. Hollow bone saves with soft hands? She tilted her head. Why? Ethan hesitated. He could have told her survival demanded it, that helping the boy might make the tribe spare his life. But the truth slipped out before calculation. Could silence it. Because life matters, even when it's fragile. For the first time since he had arrived, Kaelira did not laugh. Her gaze lingered, searching his face as though trying to reconcile the weakness of his body with the strength in his words. But the silence did not last long. A booming voice rose from the crowd. A warrior, scarred and towering, stepped forward, his eyes burning with challenge. He pointed his spear at Ethan. "He is trickster," the translator rasped. "Weakling makes false miracles. He should be tested. If he cannot survive, then he is nothing." The crowd roared in agreement, stomping their feet against the ground. Ethan's chest tightened with dread. He had only just proven himself useful, and already they demanded more. His mind raced. He could not win in a fight, not against beings 3 times his size. But perhaps he didn't need to fight. Perhaps survival would demand another kind of strength. Kaelira raised her hand, and the noise fell. Her eyes never left Ethan. There was no pity in them, only curiosity, as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting to see if he would fall or fly. "You will face the crucible," the translator said, echoing her words. "Then we will know if weakness hides strength or only death." The crowd cheered, their voices thunder shaking the air. Ethan's stomach churned with fear, but somewhere beneath the terror, a spark flickered. They wanted a spectacle. They would get one. He might not be strong enough to crush them, but he was clever enough to outthink them. As the crowd dispersed, Kaelira lingered, her gaze softer now. She bent close, her breath warm against his cheek. "If you live," the translator whispered, "then perhaps you are not as hollow as I think." Then she turned and left him in the firelight, surrounded by warriors sharpening their blades. Ethan curled his fists, his mind racing. The crucible awaited, and it would not care that he had once been the weakest on earth. The night before the crucible trial, Ethan sat alone in the corner of a stone chamber that smelled of smoke and sweat. The warriors outside sharpened their blades in rhythm, the scrape of metal echoing like a dirge meant for him. His chest was tight, his breaths shallow, not only from the thin air but from the weight of dread pressing against his ribs. He had been mocked on Earth, dismissed as fragile, but this was different. Here, he wasn't simply going to be laughed at. Here, if he failed, he would die, and his death would be nothing more than entertainment for the tribe. The fire in the center of the chamber crackled. Ethan stared into it, forcing his mind to work past the terror. The crucible, whatever trial they intended for him, would be designed to break the strongest of their kind, which meant brute force could not be his answer. He had to survive by doing what no one expected. His only advantage was his mind. At dawn, they dragged him out into the heart of the village. The sky was bronze with the light of 2 rising suns, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Warriors lined the cliffs that formed a natural amphitheater. The children clung to the ledges, their eyes bright with hunger for spectacle. At the center of it all was Kaelira, her bronze skin gleaming, her golden eyes fixed on him. She looked neither mocking nor sympathetic, only curious, as though she stood before a riddle waiting to be solved. The ground trembled. A gate at the far side of the arena groaned open, stone grinding against stone. From the darkness within, something moved. A low growl, deep and resonant, rolled through the air like thunder. The warriors cheered, stamping their feet. Ethan's throat went dry as the beast emerged. It was unlike anything he had seen in all his studies. Taller than 2 men, its body was plated with natural armor that glistened with acid. Its eyes glowed faint green, its breath steaming against the air. Each step cracked the earth beneath its talons. The crucible was not a test of endurance. It was a test of survival against a predator built to kill. Ethan stumbled back, heart pounding. He had no weapon, no armor, only his wits. The beast roared, a sound that shook the cliffs, and charged. He dove aside, rolling across the dirt, feeling the wind of its strike as its claws tore through the stone where he had just stood. The crowd roared in delight. Ethan gasped for breath, his chest burning, but forced himself to focus. He remembered how the beast's saliva hissed when it hit the ground. Acid. Its armor was nearly impenetrable, but armor had weaknesses. Every shell had a seam. He scrambled toward the cliffs, narrowly dodging another strike. His eyes scanned the terrain. The arena wasn't just a killing ground, it was a trap for anyone foolish enough to fight head-on. But maybe it could be a weapon if used cleverly. He spotted jagged stalactites hanging overhead, cracks running through their bases. The beast charged again. Ethan darted aside, this time not away from it, but past it, drawing it toward the cliff wall. The predator struck, its claws lodging into stone for a heartbeat too long. Ethan grabbed a sharp shard of rock and slammed it against the weakened base of a stalactite. It cracked, groaned, then collapsed. The shard speared downward, slamming into the beast's armored back. The impact shattered one of its plates, exposing the vulnerable flesh beneath. The creature shrieked, spinning in fury, acid spraying. Ethan barely leaped clear in time, his sleeve burning as droplets hissed into the fabric. The crowd erupted in shock. Warriors who had come expecting his death now leaned forward, eyes wide. Kaelira's gaze sharpened, the corner of her lips curving slightly upward. But Ethan wasn't done. He knew the beast would not fall to one wound. It circled him now, cautious, blood dripping from its cracked armor. He could see its breathing quicken, its movements jerky with pain. His heart pounded, his body screaming for rest. But his mind raced faster. He darted toward the broken moss he had used the night before. Grabbing a handful, he smeared it on a spear, discarded near the wall. The moss's bitter juice had neutralized venom. It might also weaken flesh already torn open. He sprinted forward, dodging a swipe that nearly ripped him apart, and drove the crude spear into the exposed wound. The beast screamed, thrashing violently. Acid sprayed in every direction, sizzling into the ground. Ethan dove for cover, his skin burning where droplets landed, but he didn't stop watching. The wound spread, flesh breaking down as the moss's enzymes fought the creature's blood. The predator staggered, then collapsed with a final, shuddering roar. Silence fell over the arena. The crowd, stunned, stared at the frail human standing over the fallen predator. Then the silence broke into thunderous roars of disbelief and awe. Warriors who had mocked him now pounded their fists against their chests. Children gasped in wide-eyed wonder. Ethan stood trembling, his chest heaving, his body cut and burned but alive. His hand clenched the broken spear, his knees threatening to buckle beneath him. Kaelira stepped forward, her golden eyes never leaving his face. She stopped just a breath away, her towering presence overwhelming. For the first time, her voice, through the translator, was low, almost reverent. "No warrior has slain the crucible beast alone," she said. "And you, with no blade, no armor, no strength." Her gaze softened, her lips curving into something like respect. "Perhaps weakness is not what I thought." The crowd roared again, chanting a name they had just given him, though he didn't yet know its meaning. Ethan, barely standing, looked up at Kaelira. For a moment, the jeers of earth felt far away, replaced by the fire in her eyes. He had survived not by becoming like them, but by being himself. And for the first time in his life, the world looked at him not with pity, but with awe. The night after the crucible trial, the village fires burned brighter than before. The massive predator's carcass had been dragged into the square, its armored hide displayed as a trophy. Warriors pounded drums carved from bone, their chants echoing through the cliffs. They were celebrating not just the fall of the beast, but the survival of the one they had called Hollow Bone. Ethan sat apart from the revelry, his body bruised, his arms still stinging from acid burns. He chewed the bitter moss he had learned could dull the pain. The cheers and stomps of the tribe thundered through him, not in mockery this time, but in something new recognition. And yet, he didn't feel like a champion. He felt like a man who had barely scraped by, who had survived, not through might, but through desperation and a frantic mind. Kaelira approached through the firelight, towering over him as she always did. Her armor gleamed, her golden eyes catching the flames like twin suns. The others stepped aside as she passed, a sign of her authority. She crouched down so her gaze met his, close enough that he could see the faint scar that ran along her jaw. "You lived," her translator said in its metallic voice, but her tone was softer than before. "Not luck, not chance, you bent the beast to your will." She studied him, as if the puzzle of his existence still refused to fit together. Then she tilted her head. "Tell me, why do you fight like no warrior I have known?" Ethan's lips were dry, but he forced words out. "Because fighting isn't what I do. Observing is. The beast showed me how to kill it." Kaelira's gaze lingered. Her hand brushed the broken spear he still clutched. Then her fingers touched his wrist, tracing the acid burns with surprising gentleness. "Strange," she murmured. "Soft hands that kill where strong ones fail." For a moment, the world fell quiet. The revelry faded. Her touch lingered just long enough for Ethan to feel something stir inside him, something that had nothing to do with survival. Then she pulled away, rising to her full height, her voice sharp again. "Do not grow arrogant. One beast does not make you strong." She turned, her long braids swinging, and rejoined the celebration. Ethan exhaled slowly, his heart pounding harder than it had when facing the predator. The next days tested him in different ways. Warriors came to challenge him, not with claws or beasts, but with questions. They brought him injured animals, poisoned cuts, spoiled food. Each time, they expected him to fail, to prove that the crucible victory was a fluke. Each time, he found an answer. He crushed seeds to create antiseptics. He bound wounds with fermented bark that drew out infection. He boiled spoiled grain until the toxins leached away, saving stores of food the tribe had been ready to discard. With each act, whispers spread. They began to call him seer of the small things. But not everyone welcomed him. The scarred warrior who had demanded his trial watched him with narrowed eyes, his pride wounded by the outsider's rise. One evening, as Ethan bent over a child with fever, the warrior muttered to the crowd, "His tricks will fail. The gods of Thyros will not suffer weakness to wear the mask of strength." Suspense thickened in the air. Ethan knew he had won temporary trust, but suspicion lingered like a shadow. Any mistake could turn awe back into mockery, or worse, execution. Kaelira, however, grew closer. She began to sit with him in the evenings, her massive frame folding onto stone beside his slight body. At first, she asked about his methods, how he saw what others missed, how he knew where to look. But over time, her questions changed. She asked about Earth, about what it meant to grow up in a place where the weak were discarded, not by death, but by ridicule. One night, as rain hissed against the ground outside their shelter, Kaelira admitted something in a voice almost too low for the translator to catch. "I was raised to believe strength is everything. My father died proving my mother demanded I never show softness. But you," she trailed off, her golden eyes searching his. "You frighten me in ways I do not understand." Ethan felt heat rise in his chest, not from shame this time, but from something dangerously close to longing. He wanted to reach for her, to tell her she frightened him too, not because of her power, but because she was the first person who looked at him as more than weak. Instead, he whispered, "Maybe strength isn't about never breaking. Maybe it's about knowing what to protect." Her gaze softened. For a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed to hush. She leaned closer, close enough that her breath warmed his cheek. Then, with a sudden shift, she stood, her armor clinking. "Do not speak such things too loudly," she warned, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of something she tried to hide. Suspense soon returned with violence. Scouts rushed into the village one morning, their bodies bloodied, their voices frantic. Another tribe was coming, drawn by tales of the hollow-boned man who killed the crucible beast. They did not believe. They wanted proof, and they came with weapons. The drums of war shook the cliffs. Warriors armed themselves, shouting oaths. Ethan stood at the edge, fear clawing at him. He had survived beasts and mockery, but now an entire tribe of warriors marched to challenge him. Kaelira approached, her face hard, her hand gripping her massive blade. "They come for you," she said simply. "They believe you a trickster. If you fall, they will burn this village to prove their strength. If you live, they will kneel." Ethan's heart pounded. He had never felt so fragile, so close to being broken. Yet Kaelira's eyes held his, fierce and unwavering. For the first time, he understood she was not mocking him. She was entrusting him with her people's survival. The sound of war horns split the sky. The rival tribe appeared on the horizon, their banners rising like storm clouds. Ethan's lungs tightened, but he clenched his fists. He had survived the crucible. He had bent the small things to his will. Now, he would have to face something. Large entire people determined to see him fall. And this time, it would not be enough to simply survive. He would have to lead. The war horns still echoed in the cliffs when the rival tribe appeared, their warriors marching like a wall of bronze and fury. The ground shook beneath their steps, dust rising in a thick haze as banners marked with beast. Skulls swayed above their heads. Their leader, a giant with skin marked in blood-red paint, stepped forward and raised his voice, amplified by a crude device strapped to his chest. "Where is the false one?" the translation carried across the valley. "Where is the hollow-boned trickster who claims victory over the crucible beast?" The warriors of Kaelira's tribe bristled, their spears rising like a forest of steel, but all eyes slid toward Ethan. He stood small among them, his thin frame hidden beneath a borrowed cloak. his breath already shallow from the thin air of Thyros. The sight of him drew laughter from the rival warriors, booming and merciless. Ethan's heart pounded so hard he thought it might tear free from his chest. He had survived monsters, venom, acid, humiliation, but this was different. This was an army demanding proof. One misstep, and not only his life, but Kaelira's people would be swallowed by fire and blade. Kaelira stepped beside him, towering and fierce, her golden eyes locked on the rival leader. "He is no trickster," she declared, her voice carrying like thunder. "He killed the beast you worship in fear. If you doubt, then face him in the crucible's shadow and learn why your gods tremble." The rival tribe erupted in laughter. This thin creature, this broken reed, their leaders sneered. If he wins again, then perhaps the gods have chosen him. But if he dies, your people bow to us. Ethan's legs trembled. He wanted to say no, to admit the truth that he was terrified, that he was not built for battles of armies. But then Kaelira leaned close, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "You survived because you see what others miss. Do it again, not for yourself, for us." The words struck deeper than any spear. For the first time in his life, someone did not ask him to prove he was strong for himself, they asked him to be strong for others. He nodded, his throat dry. The tribes formed a wide circle on the valley floor. At its center, Ethan stood facing a champion of the rival tribe, a towering warrior whose arms bulged like living stone, whose spear gleamed with the skulls of beasts slain before. The crowd roared, the ground vibrating beneath their stomps. The champion attacked first, his spear striking like lightning. Ethan barely rolled aside, the tip grazing his shoulder and cutting a shallow line. Pain seared him, his chest heaving as he scrambled to his feet. The crowd jeered, but Ethan's eyes never stopped moving. He noticed the champion's armor, heavy and layered, slowing his movement just enough. When he turned, he noticed the cracks in the valley wall, the loose stones above them. He noticed the sweat on the warrior's brow, the way his breathing came harder beneath the weight of his armor. He could not overpower him, but he could outlast him. The champion lunged again, his strength shaking the earth, but Ethan dodged, always leading him toward the cliff wall. The crowd grew restless, impatient for blood. The rival leader sneered, "Run, little hollow bone. Run until your lungs burst." But Ethan was not running. He was guiding. At the last moment, Ethan grabbed a broken branch from the ground and jammed it into a crack in the cliff wall as he dove aside. The champion's massive frame slammed into the weakened stone, and the wall shuddered. With a deafening crack, boulders gave way, tumbling down in a rain of stone and dust. The warrior screamed as he was buried, his spear clattering across the dirt. Silence fell. Dust cleared. The champion lay crushed, his body pinned, his armor shattered. The circle erupted in chaos. Warriors shouted, stamping, some in outrage, some in awe. Ethan staggered forward, his body shaking, every breath a battle. But he forced himself to raise the fallen spear high into the air. Kaelira's people roared with triumph. Even the rival tribe's gears faltered into silence. Their leader's face twisted in fury, but he could not deny what his eyes had seen. "This is no trick," Kaelira declared, her voice carrying over both tribes. "He bends this world to his will. He is strongest, not by flesh, but by mind. Deny it, and deny what your own eyes have witnessed." For a moment, the rival leader said nothing. Then he spat on the ground and growled, "The gods test us through him, but this is not over." He raised his hand, and his warriors retreated, their banners falling back into the dust. Ethan collapsed to his knees, his chest on fire, his body trembling so violently he could barely stay upright. Kaelira rushed to his side, kneeling and cradling him against her chest with surprising gentleness. Her golden eyes shone with pride and something deeper, something she no longer tried to hide. "You fought not with strength," she whispered, brushing dirt and blood from his face. You fought with your truth. And today, it was enough. The crowd still roared, but Ethan barely heard it. He stared at Kaelira, her face so close, her warmth so steady against his broken body. And for the first time he felt something he had never known on Earth's belonging. But the ground trembled again. This time it was no army. The cliffs shook, the sky above darkening with unnatural clouds. Deep beneath the valley floor, something stirred, a pulse like the heartbeat of the planet itself. The rival tribe had left, but the true enemy had awakened. Kaelira's eyes widened as the tremors grew. The old ones, she breathed. The machines that sleep beneath the world. Ethan's blood ran cold. He remembered the strange carvings, the unnatural patterns in the stones, the way the storms had seemed alive. This planet was not just hostile by chance, it was designed to be hostile. It was not only a crucible for tribes, but for the entire species that dared live here. As the earth split and glowing veins of energy surged upward from the ground, Ethan realized the truth. The planet itself was a weapon, and now it had awakened to test them all. Asterisk. The earth split wider with every tremor, glowing fissures tearing across the valley like veins of molten fire. Warriors stumbled, some falling to their knees in terror. The drums stopped, silenced by a force greater than any rival tribe. From the cracks rose towers of ancient metal, half flesh and half machine, covered in alien script that pulsed like a living heartbeat. The sky turned darker, the clouds swirling into a vortex above, and the air grew heavy with static that raised the hair on Ethan's arms. Kaelira pulled him to his feet, steadying him as the ground shuddered beneath them. Her golden eyes were fierce, but beneath that strength, Ethan caught a flicker of something he had never seen in her before. Fear. The old ones built this world as a trial, she said, her voice low, almost reverent. They left machines to decide who is worthy to live. They awaken when tribes grow too proud, when weakness spreads. As if to answer her words, one of the towers split open, revealing a colossal sentinel. Its body was a fusion of chitin and steel, its eyes glowing with emerald fire. With a scream like grinding stone, it released a wave of energy that sent warriors sprawling. The message was clear. The crucible was not over. It had only just begun. The warriors of Kaelira's tribe tried to attack. Spears flew, blades struck, but each weapon shattered uselessly against the sentinel's hide. The rival tribe had returned, their leader pointing and shouting that the false one had angered the gods. Panic erupted. Chaos reigned. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his breath ragged. His entire life had been about observation, about seeing what others ignored. Now, amidst the chaos, his eyes scanned the machines. He noticed the strange organic fibers running through their joints, the way energy pulsed not evenly, but in rhythm, like blood through veins. These weren't mere machines, they were living constructs, designed with weaknesses hidden inside their strength. Stop fighting blindly, he shouted, his voice breaking but carrying far enough to make a few warriors glance his way. He turned to Kaelira, gripping her arm. They're not gods, they're tests, and every test has a flaw. Kaelira searched his face, torn between disbelief and the fire of trust that had carried her this far. Finally, she nodded. Show me. Together, they moved toward the sentinel. It struck at them, its clawed arm crashing down, but Kaelira blocked the blow with her blade, the impact sending shockwaves through her body. Ethan darted under her guard, his eyes fixed on the glowing veins in the creature's joint. He grabbed a broken spear, smeared its tip with the moss paste he had used against venom, and rammed it into the pulsing seam. The sentinel shrieked, a sound that rattled bones. Its arm spasmed, green fire sputtering. Warriors gasped. For the first time, the machine bled. Strike where the veins run, Ethan cried out. Not the armor, the veins. The tribes listened. Spears flew toward the glowing seams, and the sentinel staggered. Another tower cracked open, releasing more guardians. But now, the warriors had seen the truth. They fought with precision, guided not by rage, but by Ethan's sharp observations. One by one, the sentinels fell, their screams echoing into the sky until the ground stilled and the fissures began to close. Silence followed, heavy and awestruck. The warriors stood surrounded by the broken hulks of their would-be gods. The rival tribe lowered their weapons, their leader staring at Ethan with eyes wide, his voice trembling when he finally spoke. The weakest commands the crucible itself. The words rippled through the valley, repeated by hundreds of voices, until the cliffs shook with the chant. Kaelira stepped forward, her massive form casting a shadow over Ethan, but when she turned to face the tribes, her voice was filled not with scorn, but with pride. On earth, she declared, her translator echoing her words, he was weakest. Here, he has shown what true strength is, not in the arm, not in the blade, but in the mind, and in the heart that dares to protect. She looked down at him, her golden eyes burning with something fierce and tender. Then, before both tribes, she extended her hand not as a warrior to a prisoner, but as an equal offering respect. He is no hollow bone. He is strongest on Thyros, and he is mine. The crowd roared, the sound shaking the valley. Warriors pounded their chests, children cheered, and even the rival tribe bent their heads in acknowledgement. Ethan, trembling, reached for her hand. His small scarred fingers fit against her calloused palm, and for the first time in his life, he felt not small, not weak, but exactly where he belonged. As the tribes knelt in unison, Ethan lifted his gaze to the sky, where the vortex had already begun to fade. He realized with a shock that the crucible had never been about destroying the weak. It had been about finding the kind of strength that could not be measured in muscle or bone. His frailty on earth, the very thing that had made him an outcast, had been the gift that allowed him to survive and see what no one else could. I was the weakest on earth, he whispered, his voice breaking but steady. But here, I am enough. Kaelira's hand tightened around his, her lips curving into a rare, unguarded smile. And as the fires of celebration rose once more, Ethan understood that his story had only just begun, no longer as a shadow, no longer as prey, but as the man who had turned the crucible itself into proof of humanity's strength.